This is City of Static, a series. Book 1, The Silence After. The day the sky switched off. At 14:17 UTC, the sky above the South Pacific shimmered. The test had not been announced publicly. It had not been debated in any parliament or Congress. It had not been discussed on the news. It existed in secure folders, inside hardened bunkers, beneath a desert range belonging to one of the world's major powers, a classified demonstration of next-generation electromagnetic warfare. The device was meant to prove dominance without bloodshed, a weapon that could end wars before they began. It was designed to pulse. It did not stop pulsing. When the containment algorithm failed, the device climbed, not physically, but in frequency, cascading, amplifying, feeding on its own surge. By the time engineers initiated abort commands, the burst had already breached the ionosphere.
The first aircraft lost power over the Pacific, then over Asia, then over North America. Cockpits went dark mid-sentence. Air traffic control towers froze. Hundreds of planes became gliders with no instruments. Some pilots managed emergency descents. Most did not. In Arizona, a commercial airliner dropped through suburban sky like a falling cathedral. In the Outs, a transcontinental flight vanished into cloud and stone. On the eastern seaboard of the United States, 3 aircraft collided blindly within minutes. Airspace became silent. Then came the reactors. Nuclear power stations are built with redundancies, backup diesel generators, independent cooling systems, layers of protection designed precisely for grid failure. But no one had accounted for a global, synchronized electromagnetic cascade that permanently fused circuitry from primary control boards down to the smallest regulator chip. Control rods deployed in some facilities. In others, they stalled halfway. Cooling pumps failed across continents. Within hours, coastal exclusion zones formed not by decree, but by radiation. Financial markets disappeared in a blink. Satellites blinked out. Every microprocessor connected to the grid, directly or indirectly, was reduced to inert metal and silicon. Cars stalled mid-highway. Modern tractors died in fields. Hospital ventilators failed. Digital banking vanished. The world did not explode. It simply stopped. And in the small northern Ontario city of Greyhaven, population 18,642, no one understood what had happened. Not yet. Mayor Eleanor Vail. Eleanor Vail was in a budget review meeting when her phone went black. She assumed it was the battery. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and died. The chamber inside Greyhaven City Hall fell into the kind of silence that only exists when something mechanical stops humming. The councilors laughed at first. "A breaker," someone said. "Winter grid strain," someone else muttered, though it was mid-August. Eleanor remained seated. She listened. Outside the windows, no traffic, no air conditioning units, no distant highway drone, just wind moving through pine trees. "Call Hydro," Councilor Mercer said. "I would," Eleanor replied evenly, holding up her dark screen. No service. They waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. City Hall's backup generator did not engage. That unsettled her. Greyhaven's emergency systems were old, but tested every quarter. The generator was analog, mechanical. It should have roared alive automatically. It didn't. A clerk entered the chamber without knocking, a breach of protocol that made every councilor turn. "There's no power anywhere," she said. "Not just here, the whole downtown. Traffic lights are out, phones too." "How far?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know." They stepped outside. Main Street was already confused chaos. Drivers stood beside stalled vehicles. The digital billboard above the pharmacy was dead. The gas station pumps were frozen mid-transaction. An elderly man was shouting at his car as if insult alone might restart it. Eleanor's stomach tightened. This was not a grid failure. This was systemic. "Get me the police chief," she said. "He's already on his way," the clerk replied, "but his cruiser died 2 blocks over." The word "died" hung in the air longer than it should have.
Chief Malcolm Reed. Malcolm Reed had served 27 years in law enforcement. He had never seen silence behave like this. When his cruiser cut out, he thought it was the alternator. When dispatch stopped responding, he thought the tower had gone down. When his radio became nothing but static, a thin, dry hiss, he understood something larger was wrong. He stepped out into the intersection at Bay and King. Every vehicle was dead. Even the new electric delivery vans. Even the old diesel pickups. He looked up. The sky was empty. Greyhaven didn't have much air traffic, a regional flight twice daily, but the absence felt wrong. The air itself seemed paused. A teenage boy approached him. "My dad's plane was supposed to land in Toronto an hour ago," the boy said. "My mom can't get through to anyone." Malcolm did not answer immediately. He did not speculate. He did not reassure. That was his discipline. He walked to City Hall on foot. By the time he arrived, people were gathering in knots along Main Street. Businesses had propped doors open. Owners stood inside dim interiors, staring at lifeless cash registers. Inside the council chamber, he found Mayor Vale already issuing directives. "Malcolm," she said without preamble. "How bad?" He chose his words carefully. "Complete electrical failure. Vehicles disabled. Radios dead. I checked 3 blocks. Same story everywhere." "Localized?" "No." She held his gaze. "You're sure?" "Yes." The counselors were whispering now. "What causes that?" Mercer asked. Malcolm hesitated. He had seen briefings, federal emergency preparedness seminars, hypotheticals dismissed as improbable. "An electromagnetic pulse," he said quietly. The room stilled. "From what?" someone asked. He did not answer that, because if it was what he suspected, the cause was less important than the permanence, and permanence was not something municipal leaders were trained to manage. Outside, a scream split the air. Not panic, grief. They moved to the window. Smoke rose in the distance, south of town, Industrial Park direction. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "If this is global," he said, "then supply chains are gone, fuel's gone, banking's gone." "And help?" Eleanor asked. He met her eyes. "If it's what I think it is, there is no help coming." Dr. Aisha Banerjee. When the power failed at Greyhaven District Hospital, the surgical lights did not flicker. They died. The room dropped into shadow mid-incision. Dr. Aisha Banerjee did not curse. She did not freeze. "Manual lighting," she ordered calmly. A nurse grabbed a battery flashlight from the emergency cabinet. It didn't turn on. "Backup generator?" someone asked, but the generator had already failed. Aisha's gloved hands hovered over an open abdomen. The patient, a 48-year-old mechanic with a ruptured appendix, lay sedated, ventilated. The ventilator went silent. There is a particular sound a hospital makes when power disappears. Alarms failing one by one, machines collapsing into absence. It's not noise that frightens you. It's the sudden lack of it. "Bag him," Aisha said sharply. A nurse began manual ventilation. The anesthesiologist checked his monitor. Dead. All of it dead.
"How?" the anesthesiologist whispered. Aisha finished the procedure by flashlight, sweat slipping down her spine. She had trained in Kolkata before moving to Canada. She had operated during brownouts, during floods, but this was different. Every machine in the building was gone, every circuit. When they wheeled the patient into recovery, she walked the hallways herself, elevators frozen between floors, ICU ventilators dark, dialysis machines useless, 2 patients already coding, 1 elderly woman on life support had no redundancy left. Aisha found the hospital administrator near the nurses' station. "Call Hydro," he was saying uselessly into a dead phone. She took the receiver from his hand. "It's not just us," she said. "It's systemic." "What does that mean?" "It means we're a 19th century hospital with 20th century expectations." Outside the emergency entrance, sirens approached, then cut out abruptly, mid-wail. She walked outside. The ambulance had coasted into the lot. The paramedics were pushing the stretcher manually. On it, a young woman, blood pouring from a head wound. "Car stalled," one paramedic panted. "No brakes, hit a divider." Aisha looked at the empty sky above Greyhaven. Whatever had happened was not local, and if the city could not restore power within hours, the hospital would become a triage center for slow death.
Daniel Kowalczyk, grocer. Daniel owned the only full-scale grocery store in Greyhaven. Kowalczyk's market had been his father's before him. Shelves of imported produce, freezers full of meat, a just-in-time supply chain that restocked every 48 hours. By 3 p.m., the refrigerators were warming. By 3:15, customers were arguing at the registers. "Cash only," Daniel announced. "The machines won't work. But the ATM, dead. Cards, useless." The first real panic came when someone tried to leave with a cart unpaid. Daniel grabbed the cart. "Pay," he said evenly. "With what?" the man snapped. "The bank's gone." That word again. Gone.
Within an hour, Daniel had shut the doors. Outside, people pounded on the glass. He pulled down the metal security grates, installed years ago after a break-in that now felt quaint by comparison. Inside, his staff gathered. "How long until power's back?" one asked. Daniel looked at the meat coolers. Without refrigeration, he had maybe 12 hours before spoilage. Without deliveries, he had perhaps 4 days of dry goods at normal purchase rates. At panic rates, 48 hours. He thought of the 18,000 people in Greyhaven. He thought of winter. Then he thought of the mayor, and whether she understood that food was now more dangerous than guns. Principal Mary Ann Holt. The elementary school dismissed early. Parents arrived on foot, confused and irritated at first, assuming snowstorm-level inconvenience without snow. But as minutes stretched into hours, irritation turned to fear. Mary Ann Holt stood at the front doors, clipboard in hand, checking children off as they left. One boy refused to go home. "My dad's flying," he said. "His plane was landing today." Mary Ann crouched in front of him. "He's probably fine," she said, and hated herself for the lie. Above them, the sky remained clear and empty. By 5 p.m., no buses were coming. The bus engines had died wherever they were. Teachers volunteered to walk children home in clusters. Mary Ann watched the last group disappear down Birch Street. The school was quiet now. No humming projectors, no hallway lights, just wooden floors and late summer heat. She walked into her office and tried her computer again. Nothing. She sat in the dark and understood with a cold clarity that education was no longer tomorrow's problem. Survival was. Emergency Assembly. By sunset, City Hall was lit by candles and camping lanterns scavenged from homes. Mayor Eleanor Vale stood at the head of the council table. Chief Reed sat to her right. Dr. Banerjee, Daniel Kowalczyk, Principal Holt, and several department heads filled the rest. "This appears to be a permanent electromagnetic event," Malcolm said to the room. Murmurs. "Permanent?" Councillor Mercer echoed. "Modern electronics are fried," Malcolm continued, "not shut down, destroyed." "How long until Ottawa responds?" someone asked. Eleanor did not answer immediately. She looked around at the faces in the flickering light. "If this is global," she said carefully, "Ottawa has its own crisis." Silence. "So what do we do?" Marianne asked. Daniel spoke first. "We ration immediately." Heads turned. "My store has maybe 4 days of supply at standard use," he said. "At panic use, less than 2. Dr. Banerjee added quietly, "The hospital cannot sustain critical patients without electricity. We prioritize the salvageable." The weight of that statement pressed into the room. "Police presence at essential locations," Malcolm said, "starting tonight." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. This was governance stripped bare. No budgets, no grants, no federal aid. Only faces in candlelight, asking for impossible answers. "Greyhaven is hours from any major center," she said finally. "That isolation has always been an inconvenience." She met each of their eyes. "Now it is our only advantage." The first night. Looting did not begin violently. It began with fear. At 9:12 p.m., someone broke a pharmacy window. By 9:30, 3 more storefronts were compromised. Chief Reed's officers, now on foot, could not cover the entire downtown. A group of teenagers smashed into an electronics shop out of habit before realizing everything inside was useless. Daniel stood inside his darkened grocery store with a shotgun he had never fired at a human being. The metal grates shuddered as someone tested them. "Go home!" he shouted through the bars. A rock struck the glass. Elsewhere in town, a house fire burned unchecked, electric stove left on when the surge hit. The fire department's trucks had died. Volunteers formed bucket lines from backyard pools. The night smelled of smoke and pine sap. At City Hall, Eleanor listened to reports. She had imagined political crisis as negotiation, compromise, policy. She had never imagined deciding which laws still applied when enforcement itself had collapsed. "Curfew," Malcolm said. "With what authority?" a counselor asked. "With survival," Eleanor replied. She stepped outside briefly. The stars were brighter than she had ever seen. No light pollution, no aircraft beacons, just a vast, indifferent sky. Somewhere out there, she thought, governments were scrambling, or falling, were already gone. Static. On the second morning, Malcolm found an old analog radio in the evidence locker, confiscated years ago during a dispute. No digital circuitry, vacuum tubes, primitive, hopeful. They carried it to the roof of City Hall and rigged a makeshift antenna from copper wire stripped out of abandoned buildings. Eleanor stood beside him as he turned the dial. Static. He adjusted. More static. Then, a voice. Faint. Broken. "Anyone receiving? Northern transmission. Reactor containment failure. Repeat." The signal dissolved. Eleanor felt her knees weaken. "Which reactor?" she asked. Malcolm didn't answer, because the broadcast had not specified a country or a continent, only failure. The mathematics of winter. By the third day, panic had matured into calculation. Greyhaven sat between dense boreal forest and a long, cold lake that froze hard by late November. Winters here did not inconvenience people, they tested them. Mayor Eleanor Vale spread a paper map across the council table. No digital projections now, no spreadsheets, just ink and instinct. "We have 12 weeks," she said quietly. "Until what?" Councillor Mercer asked. "Until nighttime temperatures drop below freezing." Wood stoves still existed in some older homes. Cabins along the outskirts had them. A few farms used propane tanks, but propane delivery required trucks. Trucks required electronics. Electronics were dead. "How many homes rely fully on electric heat?" Eleanor asked. Marianne Holt answered, "Roughly 60%, the newer subdivisions especially." 60% of 18,000. Eleanor did the math aloud. 10,000 people, she said, roughly. Dr. Banerjee folded her arms. "Cold exposure mortality begins within hours once temperatures drop below zero indoors." "We can convert buildings," Daniel suggested. "Centralize heat, the school gym, churches." "With what fuel?" Mercer shot back. Silence. Malcolm leaned forward. "The forest," he said. They all looked at him. "Chainsaws won't work," he continued, "but axes will." "That's not sustainable at scale," Mercer replied. "We're not lumberjacks from the 1800s. "No," said Malcolm. "We're worse. We're softer." Eleanor felt something shift inside her at that word. Softer. They had grown used to outsourcing hardship, outsourcing resilience, outsourcing risk. Now there was no one left to outsource to. "Then we harden," she said quietly. Water. The water treatment plant sat 2 kilometers south of town. On the 4th day, the pumps stopped. Gravity sustained flow briefly, then pressure dropped. By noon, taps sputtered air. A city without water collapses faster than one without food. Malcolm and Eleanor drove, or rather walked, to the facility with 2 engineers. Inside, control panels were blackened, circuit boards cracked. "This wasn't a surge," one engineer said. "This was systemic burn." "Can we operate it manually?" Eleanor asked. The engineer hesitated. "Some components are mechanical, but chlorine regulation, pressure valves, monitoring, it's all dead." "Work around it." "With what?" Outside, word was spreading. People began drawing water directly from Lake Gray, untreated. Dr. Banerjee arrived on foot by late afternoon. "If they drink that untreated," she said, "we'll have cholera-level outbreaks within weeks." "Boil advisories?" Mercer suggested. "With what fuel?" Daniel countered again. Every solution collapsed into another problem. Eleanor stood on the edge of the lake that evening. Children were already filling buckets. The water looked clean. It was not. She felt the first true edge of despair then. Not because the systems had failed, but because the solutions required coordination, and coordination required trust, and trust was beginning to fracture. The fracture. It began during the 5th Council Assembly. Tempers had been simmering, sleep was scarce, food distribution had begun under Daniel's ration system, 1 bag per household per day. People complained it wasn't enough. It wasn't. Councillor Mercer slammed his palm against the table. "We need to secure the food and restrict movement entirely," he argued. "Martial enforcement, curfew violators detained." "In what jail?" Marianne snapped. "We have 1 holding cell." "We cannot allow chaos, and we cannot starve children while debating optics," she fired back. Eleanor let them argue for 30 seconds before standing. The room fell silent. "This is no longer about policy preference," she said. "It is about survival legitimacy." They stared at her. If the people believe we are hoarding or failing them, she continued, they will replace us. With who? Mercer scoffed. With whoever promises certainty. That hung in the air like smoke. Outside City Hall, a crowd had begun gathering daily. Not violent, yet, but watching, waiting. Leadership in a functioning democracy is persuasion. Leadership in collapse is credibility, and credibility was thinning. Smoke on the horizon. On the 7th morning, Malcolm climbed the old fire lookout tower north of town. He needed perspective. From that height, Greyhaven looked almost peaceful. Smoke curled from improvised cook fires. People moved slowly through streets no longer ruled by traffic. It could almost be mistaken for a historical reenactment. Then he turned west. A column of dark smoke rose in the distance. Too thick for a campfire, too sustained for a house. Industrial. He watched for 10 minutes. It did not dissipate. He climbed down and walked quickly back to town. At City Hall, Eleanor was reviewing volunteer rosters for woodcutting crews when he entered. "There's smoke," he said. "Where?" "West, highway direction." Her face paled slightly. "How far?" "Close enough to matter." They both understood what the highway meant. Greyhaven was hours from the nearest major center, but not unreachable. If urban areas had descended into chaos faster, if people were fleeing north, if vehicles older than the pulse, purely mechanical, were still operational. "How many?" she asked. "I don't know," Malcolm admitted. That was the worst answer of all. Outside, the crowd had grown thicker than usual. Word traveled fast without phones. Rumors moved mouth to mouth now. "Is it Toronto?" someone asked from the steps. "Are they coming here?" Eleanor stepped forward. Her voice carried, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "We do not know what is happening beyond Greyhaven," she said, "but we will prepare." "For what?" a man shouted. She held his gaze. "For the possibility that we are no longer alone." That night, Daniel doubled the guards at his store. Dr. Banerjee began isolating antibiotics. Marianne organized children into work groups, something to occupy fear. Malcolm stationed volunteers along the western road with binoculars.
And Eleanor stood alone in her office after midnight, staring at the dead phone on her desk. Somewhere in the world, she thought, the government responsible for the failed weapons test was either hiding the truth or gone entirely. It no longer mattered. The age of interconnected civilization had ended in a burst of invisible light. What remained was Greyhaven. Axes, buckets, ration cards, and smoke on the horizon. Subscribe and hit that bell to be advised when the next City of Static thrilling audiobook is posted. This is book 1 of a 5-book series, and I post stories on a weekly basis. Thank you for listening.